Today we're going to talk about the internal equinox. But before we do that, I have to share something. I just have to.
Good.
Okay.
Good. Then I don't have to tell them.
I did something really brave. I stepped way outside of my comfort zone. Way outside of my comfort zone. For those of you who get my newsletter, probably I wrote about it this week. So I found out about an opportunity. Carolyn Mace, if you know her, is coming to Corvallis at the end of March, and they are looking for an opening speaker. And a friend of mine shared this opportunity with me, and she said, "It's not for me, Lorena, but I think it's for you." And I started to shake immediately, which is a sign that this is something I have to do. And then I found out about the video requirements. You have to submit a little video or a thing about yourself, and that scared the bejeebers out of me. That there's something about that I've never been interested in that. So it was a real process, like 2 or 3 weeks, talking myself into the fact that I could do this. So the deadline was Tuesday. And so last weekend, I sat down with my kids, first with Logan, we did like 20 takes or something, and then with Kaylee a couple days later, another 20 takes. And of course, when you're looking at yourself, and I thought to myself, well, first of all, where'd my spiritual tools go? Right? And then I said, where did perfection go? Even though I don't believe in perfection, right then in that moment, I really, really wanted it, and I couldn't find it. And it was so sweet, because Logan, when he was behind the camera, he said to me, "Mom, just be yourself." It's like, oh, they're listening. And then Kaylee said, "Mom," after about umpteen takes, "don't get frustrated. You got this." I mean, it was just so sweet. And so we finished the video, and then I had to submit it. That was the hardest thing, to push that send button to upload it, that I've done. And I've done some stretching kind of things, and that took me over the edge. I thought I was going to just lose it right there. And Kaylee's goes, "Mom, push the button. Just push the button. Mom, push the button." Seriously, I'm not adding emphasis for dramatic effect. This is really how it was. I was paralyzed in fear. And I pushed the button, and we sent it. And then I started trying to talk myself out of it. Well, if I don't get it, that's okay, because I'm not sure, and whatever. And so Saturday was the deadline. And they were going to let 7 people know, and they're going to have a live event March 26th, where each of those 7 people will get 7 minutes to speak. The audience will choose their favorite, and that person will open for Carolyn on the 31st. They posted it yesterday, and I'm looking. Part of me saying, I so don't want to be on that list, and the other part is like, yes, please. And there it was, Lorena Smith. And I'm thinking, wow, I cannot believe I did that. And this is a talk for a different time, but I want to ask you, because I can only talk about what's in me, when was the last time you amazed yourself? Yeah, right? I mean, life is about those moments. Like, what have you checked lately to see what you're capable of? Because I'll bet you're capable of so much more than you're giving yourself credit for. So much more. So, I feel terrified. Yesterday, I was just in celebration, and I knew that there was going to come a time when the fear and the anxiety are going to be right back, and here they are. Here they are, and that's okay. I welcome them, because today we're talking about internal equinox. And when I was thinking about the equinox, because we just changed the clocks, of course I looked it up because I love words. The equinox is the time or date at which the sun crosses the celestial equator when day and night are of equal length. And I thought, ooh, that's a beautiful definition for our internal equinox as well. When the darkness and the light are of equal length. right? And I was thinking, I'm looking around, everybody's wearing green today, and I had all these plans of wearing green, and I'm wearing black, and when I went back and I sat at the piano, I had this light bulb moment. I am dressed today to represent what I'm talking about. So look, I'm in all black. I never wear black, all black. And I put it on and it felt so heavy. But for some reason, that's what I want to wear. But I want to wear my green necklace, right? And we have all of this in us. We always have the darkness and we always have the light. And the question is, at any given moment, what are we going to focus on? Because I have it all the time. So today, though I'm wearing black, I'm going to focus on my green necklace. But I get a choice, right? I get a choice. So this is a great book, Falling Upward by Richard Rohr. He's a Franciscan monk. And he talks about the two halves of life, which I don't want to go into great detail because I'm speaking about that next week and there's a lot of Salem people here. So, but it's okay. I never say the same thing twice anyways. But it's such an interesting book. So he talks about the first, and now mind you, this is not chronologically in life. He said he's met children who are in the second half of life, and he's met adults on their deathbed who are still in the first half of their life. Right? But for him, so first half of life is when we're building our container. It's when we're figuring out who we are, lots of times by figuring out who we are not. It's all about comparison, building the ego, successes, and those kinds of things, which are all great and important. And then there comes a time when oftentimes it's not necessarily by choice, but something happens to us, and we shift, and we enter our second half of life. And the second half of life becomes about disassembling everything we spent the first half of our life creating, right? To see how big is our container, and to get rid of all of the stuff, the labels, the judgments, all of that kind of stuff. And he just writes so beautifully about it. And he talks about, what did I do with my glasses? So he says, there's a gravitas in the second half of life, but it is now held up by a much deeper lightness or okayness. Our mature years are characterized by a kind of bright sadness and a sober happiness. There is still darkness in the second half of life, in fact, maybe even more. But there is now a changed capacity to hold it creatively and with less anxiety. It's a simultaneous coexistence of deep suffering and intense joy. Isn't that powerful? I love that. A bright sadness and a sober happiness. And I'm sure you wouldn't be here if you weren't in the second half of your life. Because you're stretching, you're looking at how to grow by how to let things go. Right? And have you noticed, sometimes I look at my kids, or even younger kids, and there's this innocence, right? And this naivety. And sometimes don't you think, those were the days, right? When you only could focus on that. And once you know, and life has really brought on the experiences, there's an element of that that's gone, but it's replaced by something even better. It's a deep wisdom. And while, yes, there is still sadness, there's also this appreciation, maybe for joy, that when we're real small, we kind of take for granted. He talks about the second half of life as learning how to hold opposites. and living with creative tension. It's about shifting from either or thinking to both and. And that makes me think of, paradox, right? There's this thing that we realize in spirituality and in life, there's a lot of paradox. And when I looked at paradox, it's the seemingly absurd or self-contradictory statement that when investigated or explained may prove to be well-founded or true. So it's two things that seem to be opposite, but both can be true at the same time. And Carl Jung says, the paradox is one of our most valued spiritual possessions. It reflects a higher level of intellect and, by not forcibly representing the unknowable as known, gives a more faithful picture of the real state of affairs. It's a little heady, but I like it. And Walt Whitman says, do I contradict myself? Well, very well. Then I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes. And I think that's one of the things that we learn is that having to make one thing or another be true or more true than another, really what we do is we make our world smaller. And the second half of life is all about making your life bigger and making God bigger. Right? Not only do we let ourselves out of the box, but we also let God out of the box to be that infinite, mysterious, universal force that it truly is, instead of some neat little packaged human form that we'd like it to be. So, spiritual paradox, we are all one, and we are all unique. How does that work? Right? I don't know. Calm in the middle of a storm. I especially like that one. We are that which we seek. I'm sure you have your own. These are just some of the ones that came to my mind last night. We are taught to creatively visualize what we want, and then we're also taught to release it to divine outcome. That is definitely a paradox, right? And a tough one at times. He talks about you get to this point where you almost feel like you don't belong anywhere, and at the same time, you feel like you belong everywhere. So just one member of a group, you don't necessarily need that anymore. You can be a member of lots of things, or you don't even need to label yourself as a member anymore. You just are. You just are. And I was thinking, for myself, I was thinking about this morning. For me, I think cancer is my ultimate paradox. You know, someone sent me an email recently. She and her husband, I married last year, right when my eye was starting to not work. And we kind of became friends, and they moved to Colorado, and she sent me an email, and I copied this to read this because it really struck me. She said, I put this email in my drafts folder in order to read your blog once more. Oh, if only I could put your disease into such a folder. Wouldn't that be great? Just tuck it away out of sight. Now that is so fascinating, because how many times do we try to do that with things that come into our life? Well, I'm just going to tuck it away. And she went on to say something about, if I hide it away, it will grow weary and die. But I'm not necessarily sure I believe that. Because the things that I know that I've, over the years, tucked away, they never grew weary and died. As a matter of fact, they gained power. When they were hidden away, they seemed to get this power over me that I couldn't put my finger on because I wasn't willing to bring it to the light. Because bringing it to the light is painful. But that's how we take the power away. And that's what this internal equinox is about. It's about making space in yourself for all of it. For all the emotions, all the various emotions. And what I've learned is that you can simultaneously be overwhelmed with sadness and overwhelmed with joy at the same time. But if I limit myself by saying I can only feel one thing, then I'm limiting myself in a lot of ways. And if I limit how much sadness I think I can handle or I want to experience, what I've also learned is that directly limits then how much I can experience on the other end of that continuum. Because when you turn the faucet off, you turn it off for the whole stream, you don't get to pick and choose. Right? When you turn the main valve of water off to your house, it turns it all off. It turns it all off. And so how can we have the courage to make space for all of it? Right? And I've had people tell me, so they say you have this advanced cancer, they say it's incurable, but you're not going to really accept that, right? Because, and on and on and on. And I understand that's one way to look at it. And what I've realized is that for me, I'm in the process of making space for all of it. And so I'm going to live the ultimate paradox where I believe medically I have an incurable advanced cancer, and spiritually I'm whole and healthy. And the two of those things can coexist together at the same time. And the one that gets to drive the boat is the one that I decide to focus my attention on. They're both there. But which one, on any given day, in any given moment, or second sometimes, am I going to focus on? And I've decided it can stay. We can coexist. But I get to run the ship. Right? The whole and healthy part gets to drive the boat. And so what in your life is okay, let's see. He talks about, it becomes dualistic versus non-dualistic thinking, really. Right? And he's talking about Jesus was really the ultimate non-dualistic thinker. And, he talks about scripture in Matthew. My Father's sun shines on the good and the bad. His rain falls on the just and unjust. Or don't pull out the weeds, or you might pull out the wheat along with it. Let the weeds and the wheat both grow together until the harvest. And he says, Jesus, I am convinced, was the first non-dualistic religious thinker in the West. But his teachings were quickly filtered through Greek dualistic logic. Now that's an interesting way to think about it, isn't it? Non-dualistic wisdom is just not helpful when you're trying to form a strong group, clarify first principles, or demonstrate that your idea is superior to others' ideas. At that stage, real wisdom appears to be pious and dangerous poetry. Isn't that interesting? And he talks about most institutions, by the nature of needing to be, really, are first half of life institutions, because you have to be about rules and regulations and things like that, right? It's a necessary part of it. And yet, in some way, by doing that, we limit ourselves. And we're falling into some sort of exclusion as opposed to inclusion, which we all really want. So it's just very interesting. I had never thought about Jesus in those terms. And so he talks about when, here it is, what was I looking for? Page 149. Okay. When he's talking about dualistic, where do we have it here? Okay, so he says, non-dualistic thinking emerges gradually as we learn to incorporate the negative, learn from what we used to exclude, or as Jesus put it, forgive the enemies both within and without. You no longer need to divide the field of every moment between up and down, totally right or totally wrong, with me or against me. It just is. This calm allows you to confront what must be confronted with even greater clarity and incisiveness. It's not passivity at all. It is, in fact, the essential link between true contemplation and skillful action. And when he talks about dualistic thinking, he says it's a well-practiced pattern of knowing most things by comparison. And for some reason, once you compare or label things, you almost always conclude that one is bad and the other is less good or even bad. One is good and the other is less good or even bad. So think about that in your own experience. Do you do that? I think we all have a tendency, and he's right. As soon as you allow your mind to go into a comparison mode, don't you start, well, I like this one more, I prefer this one, or this one's right, and this one's wrong. I mean, look at what's happening in our political culture, right? I mean, the example is not very far to have to look at in the bigger world. But what about inside of you? And I noticed that for myself too. And then, once I do that, I notice that then my mind starts to justify why I've just categorized things. So why this one is better than this one. And in the justification process, it starts looking for evidence, which usually comes from past experience. So I take all that baggage that I tried to set down, and I basically invite it in the door and bring it right back to this present moment. Because in comparison, that's what we're using. We're rarely fully present in the moment to get a fresh perspective on something or someone who's right in front of us. And so, that's so powerful. So how can we not do that? How can we move beyond that way of thinking to be more inclusive, to be less judgmental, to open ourselves? Right? Just a question to sit with. How could I, if that's what you're looking to do? It's a good question. In what ways am I doing this? In what ways could I maybe shift? The first way, as always, is to be mindful of when you're doing it. And to not judge when you're doing it. To say, my favorite phrase, isn't that interesting? Look at what I'm doing. Look at what I'm saying. Look at what I'm thinking, right? To get that space outside of yourself. That's one way to really propel yourself forward in your growth, is to be able to not only hold it all, but look at it all. To look at it all. And I think that is the way that we get to this kind of calm, this deep peace, that still point inside of us. Because what I've also realized is you can be completely at peace at a deep level and have a whole swirling chaos of emotions going on from your human experience. They can both be there at the same time. And then I get to say, okay, that's right. Here's the emotions, here's the chaos, and here's the deep peace. I don't know if I can I can do it at the same time. Which one in this moment am I going to focus on? Am I going to buy into the chaos of the emotions, or am I going to say, I hear you, I know you're there, and it's okay, you're welcome, and right now, I'm feeling this deep peace. I promise it's possible. And when you can, it's so glorious. Being able to hold it all is really quite spectacular. And what you end up doing is you feel like, in every way, you are completely squeezing the juice out of life, because you're no longer afraid of anything. You no longer have to hide anything. It's all welcome. And that's a great place to be.